Hey everyone, welcome back to the Grit Files. I'm your host, Loralyn Mears, and in the house with us today, we've got Christine Spang. She is the CTO and co-founder of Nylas, which is an IT company that's just getting rid of all of that redundant stuff, right? Just making our jobs a whole lot easier. I had the privilege of meeting her at Collision Conference earlier this year, and so it's so fun when I get to have a guest that I've met in person and we're meeting online. So with that, hi, Christine.
Hey, Loralyn, it's super great to be here.
Well, welcome to the show.
I'm very happy to be on it.
Well, the question I'm sure you always get asked, right? They look at it and you're a growing tech company. You guys have been around for a while, had tremendous success. People want to know, okay, Nylas, like what exactly do you do? And maybe the best way to explain this, because I know you're so technical as CTO, is pretend you're telling your grandmother what it is that you do. And then our audience, even people that are non-tech, will like instantly get it.
That's a good one. I feel like being in Silicon Valley, you kind of get used to talking to people who are in tech all the time. And it's just really useful to try to zoom out and figure out how to talk to folks who aren't in that ecosystem and community. Man, that's challenging.
Yeah, it's harder than it sounds. And many listeners that they are entrepreneurs. They run beauty salons, things of this nature. Some of them run senior and elder care services, that kind of thing. So we've got a wide range of listeners, and I always like to be inclusive to make sure that everybody kind of gets on the same page as we get started.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna give it a shot and roll with it and see if it makes sense. So basically, there's all sorts of different ways that people communicate with each other through digital channels. There's texting, phones. There's chat messages. There's emails. People use their calendars to schedule meetings, and there's a lot of fragmentation or a lot of different providers that provide the technology behind all of these different channels. And communications data that words that are in these messages often contain a lot of really useful information. And people need to work together and communicate in order to get stuff done. So what Nylas does is we make it easy to harness that communications data and connect it to all the other apps and things that people use in their day-to-day lives. And the people building those apps can make use of that communications data using very little work. So without Nylas, they'd have to work with a team of potentially many people, developing for typically months actually, in order to embed in being able to connect to that communications data, be able to get insights from it, be able to surface up actions that people might want to take from it, and also kind of extracting information that is useful to other parts of the app, using it to personalize things, stuff like that, which is all really very difficult in terms of the actual kind of programming work that people would have to do to do those things without an abstraction service like Nylas. So an abstraction, if you think of like, for example, your car, we used to have manual cars. You'd have to, press the clutch in order to change gears. And now we have automatic cars. You just move the stick and it does all the right things behind the scenes to change gears for you. And APIs, which is the thing that is the product that now sells, is like that abstraction for all of the complex processing and work that's happening behind the scenes. So instead of having to do everything manually yourself, a developer will use the Nylas APIs. They can plug in, connect to a mailbox, connect to a calendar, be able to access that data, be able to find subsets of the data that they care about, and use it in whatever way is useful to make their apps better.
So that analogy with the car really struck home. And so if I can even just kind of distill all of that information down to something for our audience, you guys are like connector widgets, and you create all these wonderful apps where you take out the trillions of dollars of wasted time and money and resources and complexity and say, here's the parts to plug and play and make your bits talk to these bits better without having to create all of the infrastructure. Was that
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we don't build any of the apps that people are using, day to day, but the people building those apps use us to be much more effective at building those apps and creating rich communication features within those apps.
Oh, I love it. So now I'm going to just keep on a thread because, it's Friday afternoon, I'm feeling cheeky, but you guys are like, if we say you're like 3M in that 3M doesn't make the products you buy, 3M makes the products you buy better, and Nylas doesn't make the apps that you use, but connects the apps that you use so that they work together better, right?
Totally.
We're on it.
We're like internet plumbing. Behind the scenes, you don't know it's there, but if you didn't have it, your life would be a lot more difficult.
Oh, brilliant. All right, we got it. We've got it crystallized. So everybody out there now is going to be on the page with us. So maybe give us a little more insight into when you had that light bulb moment and went, I've got to build this damn thing.
Yeah, I was just reflecting the other day, Loralyn, that it's actually been almost 9 years since I started this company. So a lot of ups and downs, crazy stories. And so every time I kind of go back to the beginning, it's further and further away. But obviously I need to share this a lot, and it's a very important part of the company's history. And so I did my undergraduate degree at MIT, and basically, as a part of MIT, you have to do a thesis project in order to graduate, and knew a lot of folks while I was there. And this wasn't my thesis project, but I had a friend actually. So I graduated. I actually stayed in kind of the Boston area. I was working for a different startup, during a few years kind of after I graduated. And I had a friend who had dropped out, came back, and he was finishing his thesis. So we would do coffee and yoga every week. We'd chat about, the problems that he was trying to solve. And so the idea really came from those conversations and the experience that he was having, where he was trying to build a customized email app that layered on essentially contextual metadata about who you were emailing with as you were emailing with them. And this was 2012 at the time, so really long time ago. And the technology world was obviously very different at that time. But really, kind of what I took away from those conversations, those experiences, was that the technology specifically for email at the time, if you weren't using an email client that already existed, it was really hard to actually access and do things with that data or even build new apps, because the protocols were really old. There's all sorts of different infrastructure around the world. So there are different implementations. You have to implement different protocols. And it turned out to be months and months of work to do things that seemed really basic, just display a message in a secure way that, is formatted correctly, from someone's mailbox. So the company really started with this idea that people aren't building apps that connect to the data in email and make better use of it, because it's just too hard. There's too much work. The barrier to entry is too high, and so people aren't doing it. Even though email kind of evolved after kind of Google launched Gmail with really large storage sizes. People didn't really have to delete stuff anymore. It kind of became this nexus of all sorts of digital information that relates to people's lives and to people's business work. Things like receipts, conversations, contracts, all sorts of stuff, ended up in this just sort of document repository. So it started with email and trying to make that data more accessible. And then, with all startups, I really think that it's sort of the prototypical story of how something evolves to something big is you have to start with a mission and a vision that is digestible and solves a pain point. But no one goes out with for example, with Google, their mission from the very beginning was not to organize all of the world's information. It was to, make a search engine for the early web that was better than anybody else's. But, as you spend years working on a problem, you see what it solves, you see kind of how the environment around you is changing, you get feedback from early customers. The mission and vision of the company, evolves as well. And so, today we don't always think of ourselves as being like an email specific company. Email is obviously a really big channel, especially in business. When it comes to communications data that is underutilized, but really valuable. But, at the end of the day, we really think of communications and sort of unstructured text as being, the vision of the company is to help people make use of that communications data. It's not specific to email. It's not specific to calendars and scheduling. We're building a platform that can connect to many different channels, can help process, normalize, make it easy to access and use. And then, there's technology around filtering, there's technology around processing and transformations that are really universal across those channels because at the end of the day, people are really good at words and language and using language as a means of communication. But language and just sort of unstructured text is actually really difficult for computers to understand. And we're just now getting to a point in time where the technology for computing and natural language is getting to be really powerful. And so we're kind of combining the data access as well as starting to harness a lot of how that technology in the AI ML space is evolving so that people can start making use of those insights that are in that communications data through the digital technology tools that are more and more a part of people's lives.
Yeah, a couple of things just to jump on that. First of all, nothing bad that I know of has ever come out of coffee and yoga. So, I'll get there, right? And then the second thing is that I read an article recently by a language expert that says now there's more than 20 different dialects within emoji speak. So of course it's bloody complicated for a computer to figure out. If people can't even figure out what emoji means or which emoji means what in which language, depending on the person who's sending it, whoa, right? How does a computer figure all that out? Not easy.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that we are kind of in a world where domains and things that people start out saying a computer will never be able to do that, those things are slowly kind of dropping like flies. Decade after decade, we're finding that we are able to build the technology that computers can do those things. And so I think we're kind of in this early renaissance right now when it comes to natural language and computers. And for example, the other day, I was playing around with DALL-E 2, the OpenAI generator that you can just type in a sentence and it makes art based off of whatever you wrote in. So it's really quite magical how advanced the technology is becoming for essentially natural language interfaces, and then just sort of distilling down that natural language into a way that can be connected to other apps and can be understandable by computers. Because there's a lot of ways in which computing systems are in some ways better than people at doing certain things. I recently acquired a Tesla, for example, and it has this auto follow mode. And if you're in stop and go traffic, you don't really have to touch it at all. It just, sets you a certain distance from the car in front, and it'll speed up, slow down. And I've just noticed while driving that like it's so much more responsive than like I as a human would be. Like my lag time is several seconds slower because the processing power in that car is more than like a computer the size of a room was 50 years ago. And so I just think it's really magical that we're in this time of really great digital technology change, and trying to play a small part of that with an underutilized area where people aren't able to make use of that communications data. And so we're providing a way that people can do it without having to do all the work themselves.
And it is incredible. I've been watching closely all the GPT-3 stuff and watching them interact with each other, as they have a male form and a female form, and they're finding ways to be able to have a conversation where the male form is trying to pick up, like in a dating way and romantic way, the female form, and how she's it's freaking unnerving.
Wow, I haven't seen that one.
You've got to check it out. I can send you the link if you like. But
yeah, just send me the link later. Yeah.
moving along. So you made a comment early in the podcast about like, yeah, and it, of course it's been almost a decade here, and there's been a lot of highs and a lot of lows. So what keeps you going? Like, why do you choose to do this?
Yeah, it's super funny. I in the past year, I hired an executive coach to help me. And one of the first questions she asked is, she was like, Christine, entrepreneurship is hard and stressful. Why do you show up every day? And I was like, no one's ever asked me that question. It's a funny question, but it's probably a good thing to understand. And I think when it comes down to it is like doing hard things is fun. And I don't think that the reason that I, can't quit, I won't say that I've never thought about quitting over those 9 years. Like there's always low moments. Starting a company is a roller coaster. The highs are super high, the lows are super low. And sometimes it's literally the same day that you have both of those experiences. But I just don't think I could live with myself if I quit just because it felt really hard. And I think the way that I think about it is that like you should quit when it's actually like beyond a reasonable shadow of a doubt clear that you have failed, not because you're feeling bad about the current state. Like, if you have cash in the bank or a way to make sure you can acquire cash in the bank, if you have ideas as to how to move forward, you should exhaust all of those resources trying to find a path. Like there's always problems. And I also think about this a lot, actually, like, no matter what domain or pursuit you choose in life, you're always going to have problems. Like you can't run away from having problems. I think, in sort of like a stable job, like you might have different kinds of problems, and they might be like feel less existential in that, like, if you don't solve them, like maybe the world will go on in a much less changed way than it would, if you're running your own company. But you can't run away from problems, and like you have to like learn how to be okay with having problems, because in a startup you can't solve them all. There's always more fires than you can think about, and so you have to prioritize. And I think also for me it's been really helpful to have like a physical pursuit that helps me get my mind off of whatever problems are happening in the company at any given time. And I'm really into rock climbing, and it just really centers and focuses me. And I had this problem in college actually, where it was probably, so MIT is like a really stressful experience. Everyone who arrives there was like the smartest kid in their school, and then they're thrown into a place where it's actually really hard. And for a lot of those folks, they've never really had to work that hard before. And I think the thing that I realized at MIT was that it's so important to like take care of yourself in a good way. Like 8 hours of sleep a night is not optional. You cannot, just push and push and push. Like the results will not come because unless you're one of those very few number of people who actually does fine on like 4 hours of sleep a night, which they do exist, but there's not that many of them. Oh man, I'm jealous.
I'm one of those.
The mere mortals out there do need to get that, sleep and get out and move. And, I'm a very intellectual person. I think a lot. I'm also an introvert, and I needed to like develop practices that got me out of my head, because like you can just go around in circles and get so just so stuck by staying in your head all the time. And so right after my time at MIT, I got into some forms of dancing, and then I discovered rock climbing, and that kind of became just the thing that I go to. Like whenever I have a stressful day, I'll just go to the bouldering gym and climb a bunch of boulders. And it's a meditation almost, like, because you're thinking about like, how does this hold feel? Like, what do I feel in my body? And that's very relaxing to kind of, do things and not think about things.
Until you fall off the boulder.
Yeah, there's a lot of nerds that like rock climbing because it is sort of like this puzzle shapes physical pursuit.
I get it. So we're going to keep moving along here. I've got a few more questions that I'd really love to be able to ask you. So in everyone's journey, especially yours, like I said, you've been around long enough where people shouldn't even be asking you anymore what the impetus was for your startup, because it's been so long and you've had so much success since then. But everyone has at least one, if not 50, like, oh crap moments. What was your like, like, are you kidding me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could think of a whole bunch of them over the course of the company. Like, and in the early days, the first few times this happened, like it felt like existential, like the company is going to be dead in like a week, and panic mode. But I feel a little bit inured to like the existential crisis at this point, because you always figure out a solution to the problem, even if it's hard. But a big one that kind of jumps out to me is that so we maintain all these integrations with all these different communications providers, and one of them is Google, for example. And at some point a few years ago, Google decided that every single app that connected to their email API, the Gmail API, needed to have a security audit in order to access the data, because there is a lot of really important data in there, and they were concerned about what apps were doing with that. And so and this was a mistake on our part. Like, startups are really chaotic, and we missed the initial announcement of this. It was like heard in a blog post on some Google blog somewhere, and we just didn't register it at the time. And so we got like a 6-month late start at figuring out what to do about this. And it was essentially like a 3-month fire drill where first, like, Google is a very consumer oriented company. They're not really used to dealing with like other businesses, at least for things like their APIs. They're just assuming that they were just assuming that everyone was an individual developer that was interacting with those APIs. But it turns out, building apps is really complicated. And so, we were helping, hundreds of customers integrate with those APIs through our platform. And so, none of the instructions were in any way oriented towards a business like ours, which is like, sort of the middleman between Google and all those apps. So first we had to run around and try to find someone at Google that we could talk to, which, it's a huge company, like tens of thousands of employees, and navigating that kind of thing as an outsider is very difficult. But eventually we got in touch with the right person, and then we essentially had to figure out how to get every single one of our customers through that process, adapt our APIs for kind of a new security regime. And we actually ended up having to entirely rewrite our integration with Google in about a quarter because of some of the changes that they were making as a part of this. And so, there were like spreadsheets, worked through weekends, had to rally like the whole team. It was very, very stressful. But at the end of the day, we did it. We got all the customers upgraded and compliant with, the changes, and vowed to, subscribe to all the right vendor blogs so that we wouldn't have to be caught unawares again. And I think it's that kind of stuff that stuff happens, and you got to figure out a solution for it. And in this case, it felt like something that was like just a massive lift, and it was a massive lift, but it was also something that was a problem that was possible to solve. And Google didn't want to cut off access to a bunch of apps that were on a path to becoming compliant. So with the combination of working directly with Google and just really just working our asses off, we managed to get through that and get everything in a good place again. And it's kind of amazing just looking back. But that's one of like 5 existential crises that I can think of off the top of my head, in the last 10 years. So
definitely a devastating moment for sure on those, right? I can't even imagine. Oh
yeah.
It might segue into my next question. I say okay, I give all of my podcast guests an undo button, and you get to hit it once. What do you undo, personally or professionally?
What do you undo? Oh, I know. I would undo, and this is I'm gonna have to explain a bunch about this. I would undo deciding to implement this Microsoft protocol called Exchange Web Services instead of jumping straight to Microsoft Graph, which is kind of their most recent protocol, which was kind of early on at the time. But essentially, we felt that having maximum compatibility with existing implementations and existing email installations was kind of the most important thing. But we ended up running into tons of problems further on down the line by having chosen to prefer this older protocol. Things around security, permissioning, settings on people's email infrastructures that I think we should have really tried to skate to where the puck was going, because implementing support for these protocols, especially the Microsoft ones, really complicated, was a huge lift. And I just underestimated how much work it was going to be. And we're still in the place today where we're shoring up and getting customers upgraded onto Microsoft Graph, because we had this intermediate step which worked fine, really compatible, but it didn't have all the latest features and all the latest kind of security permissioning. So when you have to maintain something for almost a decade plus, I feel like you learn so much more about just the overall cost of ownership and maintenance than if you build something, you spend 2 years at a company, you go do something else, you never really kind of see the downstream effects of what really happens over the long term and over time. And so I definitely feel like I've learned a lot from being able to see the full arc of what have been all of the downstream effects and impacts of choices we made, 4 or 5 years ago.
Like, who knew, right? And we only have a couple of minutes left, but there's a couple of questions I'd really like to ask you, Christine. So, and this is probably not a short answer, but I am going to ask that you just be mindful of the time to get
Try to
through.
be concise.
How have you changed in this journey?
Yeah, well, it's been 9 years. So I was 24 when I started this company. Now I'm 33. So I feel like it's more like, how have I not changed? um, but the biggest thing that I feel like I've learned and evolved over time is learning like what the work of leadership is, and that leadership is work. Like when I started this company, I really felt I had the identity of I am a software engineer. That's what I am. That's what I do. My identity is tied to like the hands-on building of things and shipping code. And if you want to have longevity at a company, there's going to be a time that as you grow, if you want to still lead that company, you can't be in the trenches building things hands-on all the time. And so it's been a pretty crazy journey going through all the different steps of that, where you go from hands-on building to managing a small team that builds, and then eventually things get too big and you have to like hire in people who have just more experience and expertise, because when a startup is growing super fast, like you just can't keep up. Like you can't, people's ability to grow and learn, was not designed for organizations that are doubling or tripling every year. It just falls apart. So, I had to shift into a mode of hiring in the right people, and really thinking of myself as building the company and not building the product. And yeah, that leadership is work. Like in the beginning, it didn't feel like work. I was like, oh, I didn't do much real work today because I only got, half an hour to write some code. And the rest was just silliness. But today I recognize, the energy and effort that it does take to talk in front of the team. Like the work is literally talking, communication. And I definitely thought that was BS when I was 24.
Yeah, indeed. We see this all the time. This is our specialty. Soft skills training and communication is the number one soft skill for very good reason. So quick, punch this out. How can our audience find you and how can we help you?
Yeah, for sure. You can follow me on Twitter at Spang, that's SPANG. I'd love if you give me a follow. You can also guess my email at nylas.com if you want to get in touch. It's just spang@nylas.com. And I'd love if you follow the journey of the company or even sign up and try out the APIs.
Excellent. Last quick question for the CTO and co-founder, Christine Spang of Nylas. We ask every guest to look into their closet and to tell us what pair of shoes best personifies who they are, and why does that pair of shoes speak to your personality?
Oh, yeah. It's a pair of ultra lone peak trail runners that are really beat up and actually have like holes in the sides. And they just embody adventure to me. And I really feel like that's the theme that's running through all parts of my life. Like, it's why I come to work every day, just the excitement of forging into the unknown and doing something that, is hard in a way, but also exciting and exploring. And then I also do that, in my personal life. I like to go to the mountains and explore and climb rocks. And that's why those shoes are all dirty and beat up. And I feel like I'm also like, I'm not a very fancy person. And so I kind of grew up in a simple household with simple needs, and yeah, nothing crazy.
Well, there you go. We heard it here first, right? On the Grit Files. So with that, Christine, thanks for being a guest on our show. And we do look forward to following the continued success of Nylas.
Super fun chatting. Loralyn, thank you so much.
And how about that fantastic intro by Touch Circle?